Well, with me is Garret Salpeter. He's the creator and CEO of NeuFit. And Garret, welcome to the Restaurant Recovery Podcast.
Thank you, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. And as we were kind of talking offline, it's kind of fun to connect with other people. You know, we've got a common connection with bowel strap, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But it's just fun to connect with folks who are out there with the mission to really help individuals recover well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love what you're doing here with your podcast and how you've been able to grow it and start reaching more people. And really, I'm excited to be here and be able to connect with you and share some of our story with your audience too.
So why don't we start with like NeuFit, like what it is today, and just real briefly, what is the mission of the company and the Neubie device?
Yeah, so we work with doctors and therapists to help them improve outcomes in their practice so that they can help patients recover much faster from pain and injury, recover also much faster from surgery, help them reverse chronic pain, and help them build a sustainable and efficient fitness routine. Because so many times people go through that recovery process, they get better, and then they try to go back out and resume some sort of activity, but they get injured again and they go back to square one. So being able to help people throughout that whole continuum of care, from right after you get hurt, or if you're dealing with chronic pain, all the way through building that bridge back to whatever people love to do, whatever activity that is. We're able to help people all throughout that continuum, because the common thread throughout all of that is the nervous system. That's what controls pain and muscle movement, and ultimately guides and regulates the healing and recovery and regenerative processes, and regulates health and performance and energy levels, and everything that we want in an ongoing healthy life.
Yeah. And it's amazing how things kind of roll back down to that baseline of the neural pathway when it comes to pretty much anything we do. That mind-body connection you hear about, and your big words of like neuroplasticity and things of that nature. Maybe break down, like, why is that such a fundamental component to pretty much anything relative to wellness?
Yeah, that's a great topic, and it's something that I first got interested in because of an experience I had, and now experiences that we've seen with tens of thousands of patients, where when you work with the nervous system, you're able to create these aha moments, these wow moments for people, where I had my own story where I had some torn ligaments in my wrist. I was supposed to have surgery and be out for a few months, and that's because we were looking through the lens of tissue structure. And I had this profound experience of being introduced by a chiropractic neurologist, this doctor who I happened to meet and I worked with. He helped me look through this lens of function and neurology. And we worked on the function of the muscles around the torn ligaments. And then we used direct current to help the tissues heal and tap into this electrical nature of the body and this electrical control system that regulates healing. And I was able to come back in 2 weeks instead of 3 months. And that was my aha moment. And that's what really, going through that experience, set the rest of the course of my career. That's what created within me this calling to share this work with as many people as I could. And now we see this happen all the time, where this entry point of working with the nervous system is so exciting. And I, thinking about that, I'm reminded of a recent story working in the athletic training room at a Division I football team at the university. We were working with a linebacker who had 5 days prior had a grade 2 AC separation, separated shoulder.
Oh, wow.
Couldn't move his arm. So if anyone's listening on audio, you can't see, but I'm lifting my arm about 30 degrees up, and he was stuck there after 5 days, couldn't move. And so we came in there, we were doing a demo for the staff, and they said, hey, come work on this guy. He just got injured. Do you think you can help? And we said, well, we'll see. And so we did this mapping process to identify where the neurological response to trauma, where the nervous system was limiting his movement, or the nervous system in response to injury is going to create tension in some muscles to limit movement. It's going to shut down altogether other muscles in order, again, to limit movement. And we did this mapping process, found a couple spots in his shoulder, and then we started stimulating those muscles with the Neubie, with our device. And after a few minutes, he got his arm up, from 30 degrees, got it up to horizontal. After a few more minutes, he got his arm all the way up overhead, and he looks up to it and he says, "What the heck did you just do to me?" With a little more profanity, different word choice. But
yeah.
And the answer there is that 10 minutes is not anywhere near enough time for him to heal his ligaments, right? He didn't just repair his ligaments in that time. What he did was reset the neurological response to injury, which is the thing that so often delays the healing process, makes it take longer than it should, and creates less than optimal outcomes, because people they recover, but they still can't activate the right muscles. They can't get to the same ranges of motion. It's because their brain and nervous system won't let them get there, because it learns to protect, it learns to close the box. Our brains want us, number one priority is survival. They want to protect us. And so our brains limit us more than getting us to try to do more and go further and go faster. They try to get us to do less, to stay within that safe box.
So it's that natural response of defense that kind of catalyzes that, or maybe overplays its hand. Naturally.
Exactly. Yeah. One of my favorite ways to describe this is that the nervous system will react. If I'm standing in my home office here and I see a venomous snake coming through the door, for me to have a reaction like that, is protective. For me to get up and run away or like do something that's protective, that's appropriate, that can have life-saving benefits.
Right.
But if my 6-year-old daughter places a rubber snake there and I react the same way, it's an overreaction, right? It's inappropriate. It's excessive. Right. I'm wasting energy, and it's not calibrated appropriately to what's really happening in the environment. And so many times our brains and nervous systems overreact like that. And by recalibrating, we can tell, if this football player in this example, if his ligament was completely torn and his shoulder couldn't move, he'd still be down at 30 degrees. He might have gotten a few extra degrees, but he wouldn't have gotten an extra, 150 degrees and gotten all the way up overhead. Okay. He wouldn't have done that. So what it is an opportunity to speak to the nervous system, to recalibrate that protective mechanism. And then what happened, of course, with him is by not only getting that proper movement back, is he in a better situation to protect the injured area as it heals, but he's gotten out of the way the impediments that would block the healing process. Because if he can't move, if that tissue's stuck, he's literally blocking the flow of blood and impairing the ability to bring the nutrients there. Yeah. And raw materials to heal that. So it's both important for pain and function, and also for the long-term healing outcome.
So if I'm hearing it right or understanding it right, so like the electrical stimulation kind of helps open up the arm to allow it to move more, to then continue the recovery process that may entail some kind of muscle movements and things of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. It opens up the healing pathways so the body can heal at its normal rate, and it opens up the ability of the body to do, typically more range of motion, have more strength, reactivate the muscles, so that you can oftentimes fast track that recovery process. And the thing that, the biggest difference that we've found is that by going through this process and putting the nervous system first, by prioritizing that neurological response to injury, it often optimizes the entire process, and it has, far-reaching effects, because of the nervous system has this vast, influence throughout, literally controlling or influencing everything in the body.
Well, and I've heard this from another guest. There's kind of like the 3 strands. You've got the nervous system, you have the lymphatic, and then you have blood flow, and they're all kind of like together. And then the 3 of them kind of interplay. And if you have a constriction with one, like blood flow, that's not good for healing an area, or nerve, any of the 3, that you're going to have some kind of impingement.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great way to look at it. And I would say that if you're truly taking a neurological approach here, you're going to influence the other 2, the blood and the lymph, because blood flow, blood vessels, whether they constrict or dilate, that's controlled by the nervous system. It's the autonomic or automatic part of the nervous system that works without our conscious awareness, right? We're not thinking, okay, dilate the blood vessel to my leg here. It just happens automatically. And then lymph is controlled. The biggest influence on lymph is actually the mechanical pumping action of muscles. And so if we're in this state where the nervous system can't properly activate any muscles, that absolutely does set the stage for stagnation of lymph, which if there's waste products in that and they're lingering around for a long time, can create inflammatory issues and be a burden on the body and actually lead over time to disease.
Yeah. So that's pretty fascinating. So you kind of mentioned a little bit of the catalyst that got you started. So kind of what's the the backstory behind you creating the Neubie device, and how did you get down that path?
Oh yeah, so I'd be happy to share that. I had this experience. I was actually set academically. I was playing college ice hockey, and I was set to already come to graduate school in engineering. So I came down here to the University of Texas, which is how I first got to Austin. And having had this experience, it was kind of in the back of my mind, like, hey, I'd really want to do something with that sort of thing. I didn't really know what it would look like at the time, but while I was down here doing my master's in engineering, I connected with a few people in the sports medicine world. I then made arrangements to start working with the chiropractor who was at the time working with the University of Texas athletic department in his private practice. So I had a 150 square foot room set up in the back of his office, and I was using these techniques that I had learned in functional neurology. I went and apprenticed with that doctor who I first worked with for my own injury. I went to other workshops. I, along the way, ended up going back to school here at graduate school in neuroscience and applying all these things in this practice using the older versions of direct current. And after about 5 or 6 years of doing this, I had these two really powerful realizations at the exact same time. One was, this work is awesome. This is helping so many people. We're getting momentum here in Austin. I want to share this in a bigger way. And at the same time, I wanted to be able to do more. I want to be able to improve this. There's a few really obvious things that I want to do. No one else is doing them. Finally, I decided, okay, you know what? I got to do it. So I was able to leverage some of my engineering background, call on some colleagues, and started working ended up being almost 3 years through the process of starting, developing the electronics, developing the rest of the unit, getting through the FDA and all the appropriate testing and clearances. And then we launched it in 2017. So for the past few years, we've really been focused on teaching and training practitioners around the world to enable them to share this with their communities and to help their patients get these same wow moments. And clinicians have reported to us that their patients love it. We've done some surveys, and we see that over 90% of patients notice tangible improvements in just their first visit. So
wow.
many clinicians are really pleased with that because it generates enthusiasm. Patients see the benefits, so they're motivated to want to continue, and they oftentimes refer people. It's been helpful for both the outcomes and the businesses of the people who are using it. And then we've also expanded into one of the more interesting things, here in Austin at our home office, at our kind of showroom location. We worked with, because initially started working with people like me, where as athletes who wanted to recover faster from different injuries or improve their speed or strength or build muscle, stuff like that. And because it was this more neurological approach, it's probably bound to happen. Eventually someone came to us with a more neurological issue. A woman who had a spinal cord injury was like, "Hey, I heard about what you're doing.
Yeah.
Can you help me?" And she actually had been paralyzed for 25 years. And after falling off a horse, breaking her neck in her early 20s, so she's now in her late 40s. And she came in to see us, and she, in the first visit, we did our mapping process, scanned around with those electrodes and started stimulating, and she got a little bit of a wiggle in her toe for the first time. And it was this like,
What?
it was this amazing, it was like, "Hey, did you see that?" I think I saw that. Did you see that? We looked at each other like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
This is cool. And so she, even early on, started to get a little bit of like a loosening in her hip, where one night she was at home in bed, in like the first week, and she was like, oh my gosh. And she was able to pull her leg up to her chest for the first time, where it had been locked down stiff and not really able to move. And so there were these little things that were like, oh my gosh, okay, we got to do this. And so we went through the process with her of re-triggering those same neurological learning, motor control, developmental stages of first learning to walk as a child. We had her crawling, rolling, doing all this with the machine on to help increase the neurological activation, drive neuroplastic changes, help accelerate the rate at which she's making these adaptations. And so she ended up being able to stand in with hand support, take a few steps. Then she worked up to be able to walk this long hallway at our old office building with a walker. And the first time she did it, it took 15 minutes, and she had to sit down 3 times. And then over a couple months, she worked up to her 4-minute mile. She walked that same length that took 15 minutes in 4 minutes.
Wow.
And she had this amazing experience last holiday season, around the Christmas season, where several of her family members didn't know anything about the progress she'd been making. They only saw her in the wheelchair and knew about her life, of course. And so she set up this dinner where her family was there waiting for her, and she walked in a walker, and her family's tearing up, and everyone's going crazy, like, oh my gosh, this is a miracle. And so there's these really profound stories that we've seen of now these neurological patients, and that's been a big part of the story, because we have seen, as great as it's been to help athletes, to help people who are in pain, to see some of these stories, to see people get out of wheelchairs and restore function. That's been a huge part of the story. And we've seen, thankfully, more of those stories, and now we have some studies going on with larger hospital systems to work with stroke patients, with MS patients, and measure the degree to which this can help them restore function.
Well, that's something that triggered in my mind that you mentioned the stroke patients, because I just started thinking about this as I learned about what you guys are doing and what little I know about neurology, but that mind-body connection and having issues with either TBI or stroke, if those would be helpful to support that.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting area. And if you look at the research on stroke and brain injury generally, so stroke is a brain injury because of blood being blocked and blood flow being blocked, that area of the brain not getting oxygen for a period of time, getting damaged. Traumatic brain injury is damage because of a trauma. They're both fairly similar. It depends on the severity of damage, where in the brain that damage occurred. So all those factors play into the functional losses and also the opportunities for recovery. If there's going to be any recovery, the key is neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity describes the adaptations that happen within the brain and nervous system, the way that it can either heal the areas that have been damaged or detour around those areas and allow other areas to compensate for the ones that have been damaged and are lost and offline. And in order to drive either the healing or the functional compensation, you need to have enough input to drive neuroplastic changes. And so one example of that in the stroke world is something called, oh my gosh, I'm having trouble thinking of the term, what they do is if your right side of the brain was damaged and your left hand was therefore, had lost function, typically what would happen is you would use your right hand for everything. You'd use your right hand to feed yourself, to drive your car if you're able to drive, or to operate, maneuver objects, to operate your phone or anything that you're doing. And your left hand would continue to get worse. You'd have this, the use it or lose it principle applies to all of us, but it applies even more. Yeah, it applies even more in that situation. And so that's called constraint therapy. What you would do is constrain the right arm so that patient is forced to use the left arm. And you do it for like 6 to 8 hours a day. You'd go to a facility and they would do this. An occupational therapist typically, or a physical therapist, would be with you. And they'd be having you do different activities with your right hand constrained, so you're absolutely forced to use your left hand. And over weeks and weeks and weeks of doing this for hours and hours a day, you start to accumulate enough reps, enough input. You reach that critical mass where the brain and nervous system start to adapt and either heal the areas that have been damaged or find new ways to control that left hand, and function will start to improve. But it's because you're getting that huge mass of input. It takes hundreds of thousands of repetitions. And with the type of stimulation, with the direct current stimulation of the Neubie device, the equipment that we use, and the way that direct current waveform is able to speak to the nervous system to create this amount of input, you're able to help people achieve that critical mass of input much faster. So if someone would, if it would normally take 6 to 8 hours of doing those sessions every day for months, 1 or 2 hours on the machine, you might be able to achieve that same input. And you're gonna be able to. You still have to do the work. It's just a matter of you can get there a lot faster. So it's been really cool to see that happen. So in the stroke population, we've seen people improve sensation, function, dexterity, coordination, quality of life, regain autonomy. It happens for some people a lot slower, for some people a lot faster, for some people a little bit, for some people a lot. It depends kind of on their situation, but it's been really, really rewarding and really cool to see, for the therapists who are working with those patients. For them, those have been some of their most rewarding cases.
Yeah, I'm sure that is just fantastic. And I can understand, it's kind of that inertia, for you as the creator and the provider of seeing those types of cases really being encouraging, that like you just keep going to dig into it further. And it kind of relates to even like the clients I wrote down first visit success, but I thought about mindset and how important that is in the healing process to enable, at least what I've seen, people to be encouraged early to get that mindset to keep going, because you still have to, like you said, there's still work to be done, and depending on the case, they may be pretty discouraged based on a lifetime of sedentary because of the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a big part of why getting some of those early wins is so important, because if it's a long journey, so many people, I think in life, in business, and in many areas, they may be on the right path, but they stop short because they don't see how each step they're taking is actually helping them get closer to that goal at the end. It's too tough to see the bridge between here and there. But if you can actually have some way to gauge or perceive forward progress, then it becomes so much easier to stay on that path and go navigate the challenges that come up along the way.
Yeah, I related to simplified metaphor, but pennies add up to dollars. But then I just saw this compounding interest. And it was like, if you double a penny a day, I think in a short amount of time, you've got like $1 million. And so it's kind of that same compounding effect. It sounds like that even the Neubie helps accelerate that or amplify that.
Yeah, absolutely. And also in these patients, if we're talking about these neuroplastic changes, really it applies to everybody. It's just more amplified in these cases. But the other piece of that is, and when you mentioned that compounding effect, that makes me think of another metaphor that I really like is the body bank account. If I get a good night of sleep and I eat a nutritious meal, those are deposits into my account. If I stay up late or drink alcohol, or I go play a recreational sports game or something like that, like those are all withdrawals. And I need to keep a healthy balance in there. And particularly in the realm of neuroplasticity, it's so important because people need to have the raw materials and resources to build these new neurological pathways. And not only do you have to have enough energy and resources to sustain the minimum necessary for life, to fuel the organs, to digest food, to eliminate waste, to pump blood around the body. Not only do you have to do that, you then have to have a surplus of energy left over to repair or rebuild or build new neurological pathways. And so that takes a lot of diligence in the areas of sleep and nutrition, keeping inflammation down,
Right.
getting the raw materials in, and then sleeping well enough, because a lot of the neurological remodeling happens during sleep, especially REM sleep. Deep sleep is more about repair of structures and regeneration of energy. REM sleep is more about remodeling the nervous system. So there's all these different things. And if a day or two of drinking alcohol and going to bed late can lead to days of needing to build up deposits just to get back to baseline in that account. And so if you think about the lost compounding effect there, that really makes a difference. And so that's a big part of this process of neuroplasticity, is you need the stimulus and the input, but then you also need that lifestyle support. And so one of the things that we work, in addition to the stroke population and spinal cord injury, work with a lot of MS patients.
Mm-hmm.
And if we are working with, if an MS patient comes to us, one of the first things we'll tell them about is the Walls protocol from Dr. Terry Walls, who we've worked with, and she has an excellent program that helps to block or stop the progression of the underlying autoimmune condition of MS or other autoimmune conditions. And then
Really?
Yeah. And she's done some really groundbreaking research about how her lifestyle interventions have been shown to be as effective as immune suppressing drugs for MS patients. And of course, without all the side effects and the risks. And the side effects of hers is that you have more energy and you feel better and you look more vibrant. And so it's like the side effects are like, very intentional. Like, that's what I want, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And, so we've actually worked with her very closely, because a lot of people who go through her program stop this progression of their disease, but are stuck in terms of what they can do to restore function. So
Kind of like a plateau. They've hit a plateau.
Yeah. And so her program works really well, but it's because you need to have both the stimulus and you need to have the support for that, so the body has all the resources that it needs.
It's just amazing how interdependent or how everything plays in our total body, that all the systems rely on one another. It's just such fascinating stuff to really unpack.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. And when you're talking about recovery and some of the themes in your podcast here, it's really important to account for a lot of those variables, because those are, if we're having to recover from a stressful conversation with a business colleague or a spouse, or having to recover from a poor night of sleep, we just don't have as much capacity to be on the next day, to make good decisions, to be as effective in our interactions or in our work or in our workouts, or so managing that workload. Or we use the concept of the threat bucket. When that bucket gets full, when it fills up, whether it's from psychological or physical stressors, when that gets full, typically one of the outputs is pain. Actually, that's very relevant for chronic pain. Part of this biopsychosocial model of pain, which we've learned about in neuroscience the last 2 decades. And then also it just speaks to the overall recovery capacity.
So is the Neubie something that can help with some of those things, because you're dealing with those neurological pathways to kind of heal some of that aspect of it?
So it can, and it can help in a couple ways. One is probably more commonly why people would come to us. They typically wouldn't come to us unless they were us or our network of practitioners, unless they were injured or in pain, something that would drive them to go to a physical therapy clinic or a chiropractic clinic or another sort of medical facility. So they typically, in this case, would go for chronic pain. So someone, I got this chronic back pain, I got this chronic pain in my knee or my shoulder, and I haven't been, maybe there was a previous injury, months ago or years ago, or it's just something that came on for no reason, and just kind of ebbs and flows, but it's always there. So when a patient comes in with that, we introduce the concept of this threat bucket, that we have these different threats, different stressors that we can handle, whether it be related to to sleep and food, whether it be related to our physical activity, whether it be related to physical activity can be too much or too little, whether it can be related to other stresses in our lives, deadlines, or having to drive the kids around and take care of the house and
Go, go.
have a career, and maybe there's a risk of getting fired or the stress around having to fire somebody else, or whatever those stresses are. If they fill that bucket, then the output of that is pain. Pain is the brain's way of saying, do something different, stop doing that, change your behavior. And chronic pain, when it's always in the same place, especially if there's not an injury there, there's not a fresh injury there, it oftentimes is because this threat bucket has overflowed, and it's because the brain perceives this threat. And so there's two main ways that we can help those patients. One is just to do what we call a master reset, where someone would lie on the table and we do essentially a vagus nerve stimulation
Okay.
to stimulate the parasympathetic side of the nervous system. So sympathetic is the fight or flight, parasympathetic is the rest and digest. Sometimes just doing that can help reduce or eliminate somebody's pain by just helping them shift out of that stressed out state.
Yeah.
More often though, we actually do have to do some work, go through that same mapping process so we can find where, if someone, even if it's a non-physical threat, if I'm scared or upset about something that at work or something in our business or at home, I had an argument with my spouse, my body is still going to protect and tighten, even though it's something there's nothing physical coming at me, but that psychologically something's coming at me, and my body will still protect and defend as if there were a physical threat. And so we can actually scan around on the body and go through that mapping process and find where the body's protecting, even if it's against that psychological influence, and reset that to help reduce that perception of threat, get somebody out of pain. And so it's really cool to see this two-way street between the brain and the body and the brain, and how these patterns in the body actually influence the experience of pain, and how profoundly we can help people by working with this neurological based approach.
Yeah, and I've heard it stated the issues are in the tissues, and it's amazing the emotional, like you were just explaining, emotion can end up in a physical area. It's pretty fascinating. So you mentioned the term mapping a couple times. Do you explain maybe what that is and unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So the let me grab the thing here for people who are watching on video, and I'll actually show you. So with mapping, we would actually take an electrode like this and scan it around on somebody's body. And it's really cool because traditional electrical stimulation, you're just going to be contracting the muscles. It's an alternating current signal. This, because it's a direct current signal and because of the other qualities of that waveform, what it allows us to do is bypass much of that muscle contraction and actually send these signals into the nervous system in a more powerful way. And so when I'm scanning over this muscle here, I'm sending in that signal, letting the brain know, hey, this area is being challenged, as if you were doing some movements like lifting a weight or just going through a different range there.
Okay.
When I'm on here, it lets the brain know, hey, this area is being challenged. Here lets the brain know, hey, this area is being challenged. And we're basically sending the signal from these areas, and wherever the brain, wherever that area of the body's been working well, the brain sees that and says, oh, that's not threatening, there's nothing going on there, that's within the functional capacity, no issue there. But if we stimulate an area that has one of these responses to injury and trauma, or an area that hasn't been working recently because of a stroke or because of bad habits, whatever it is, if we stimulate one of those areas, the brain is going to see that and say, whoa, that's new, that's different, that's threatening, and it's going to have this reaction. So what we're doing is scanning around, looking for those reactions, those hot spots or those areas of interest, and they end up kind of feeling like trigger points or that sort of thing. So people, patients feel them and say, whoa, I feel that, and that helps us find exactly where these underlying neurological problems are, where there's these issues in how the muscles are working or where the nervous system signals have gone awry.
Okay.
And And then by stimulating those areas, we help the brain see where the brain had been limiting output in that area. The brain is able to recalibrate and say, oh, okay, I was reacting as if that was a venomous snake, but really it's now, I see it's just a rubber snake.
Okay.
And so by doing that, it's sort of like if you had a car that could go 160 miles an hour, but you had a governor on that car that was only allowing it to go 80, you're getting rid of that governor so you can actually go 160.
Okay. So the mapping process, like, so the response is like an over response to the weakened area. Is that right? And then from there, does the mapping continue where like, okay, it's kind of this, if this, then that scenario where you may want to work on that area longer, or some kind of protocol?
Exactly. Yeah, it is like a protocol or an algorithm. Like if we find a spot here, so typically we'll find 2 to 4 spots in somebody, and then we'll work those areas. So we'd have the pads on. If we had an area on the shoulder here, if we found this, if we were doing a mapping with you and we found this on your shoulder, we'd turn it on, and then we'd have you go through different movements. So that your brain would actually learn to start reincorporating those muscles into those movements, and it will help fast track this learning process. You could have it on and just sit there and still get some benefit. And some people have to do that, like after surgery, if they, if they're not allowed to move because they need something to heal. We could just put it on, and then when they're allowed to move, they're way further ahead. But if you can, we want to get movement in there as quickly as we can. And so most patients, we put it on and we have them go through movements, and then oftentimes even within that first session, they notice these breakthroughs. Their range of motion's better, their pain's better, their strength is improved, whatever it is.
That's amazing. So makes me think back to something you mentioned earlier, joking around, as the side effects, but the positive ones. So what are some of the kind of, like, I'll say the trickle down economics of doing this? What are the other things that you could end up seeing as ancillary benefits? Maybe more on the athletic side, but anyone really doing the therapy.
I like that, trickle down economics. That's a good way to put it there. One of the cool things that we see is people will often come in to see us or see our network of practitioners, because they're injured, because they're in pain, because they want to be able to work out. And they have these really cool side effects of being able to get off blood pressure medications, with under their doctor's oversight. Of course, we're not, unless the person they're seeing it, for NeuFit treatments is also their doctor who prescribed, but typically that would be somebody else. Some people are able to get off blood pressure medications. Some people have more normal bowel movements and don't need laxatives, or they have digestive issues and they improve, or their energy levels or their libido improve, their sex drive improves.
There we go.
It's not, and it's not because we're treating that specifically. It's because we're impacting the nervous system, and the nervous system controls all of those. So it's like if you hitting that first domino, that has that trickle down, that trickle down economics effect, like you said there, and that affects these other areas because the nervous system controls heart rate and blood pressure, controls digestion and waste elimination and reproductive function. It controls the release of hormone. Yeah, absolutely. Blood flow, hormones. I mean, think about stress hormones, the damaging effects of cortisol and the healing effects of the anabolic hormones that help rebuild and repair and replenish the body. And of course, our brains and our psychological state and how we think and feel. Those are all controlled by ultimately the brain and nervous system. Yeah. And so there's an opportunity to have these really far-reaching positive effects. And we had been observing these, and that led us to start interacting with BioStrap, and that of course is how we got connected, because you've done some work with them as well.
Right.
And so we just did a study with them looking at how are the typical treatments when patients are coming in, going through this mapping process, doing exercises with the machine on, how is that typical treatment process affecting their autonomic nervous system? And we saw that patients going through this had improvements in heart rate variability, which is one of the biggest markers of, biggest markers of stress going down, their ability to handle stress improving, they're more resilient, they're having less wear and tear of dealing with the stresses of daily life. We also saw their heart rate resting heart rate decrease even without doing any cardiovascular exercise. So that's a sign that they're not having to work as hard just to maintain life. Their baseline is better.
Not
We
working
saw
as hard, right?
exactly, not having to work as hard just to get through the day. And then we saw improvements in arterial elasticity, the blood vessels, how compliant and flexible and pliable they are. And that's really important for the health of the cardiovascular system. And that's really important for, any of these, cardiovascular diseases, including risks of heart attacks and strokes and things like that. You see in those patients that the blood vessels are a lot less compliant and pliable. And so seeing that increase is good. And again, that comes back to like, well, how are we affecting that? Well, again, it's the nervous system. That's what controls the constricting or dilating of the blood vessels, as well as all these other things.
Well, that's phenomenal. It's great to hear of that study. I look forward to seeing more of that. But like you said, HRV personally is an area of focus as well, and just seeing that mental emotional state and how that impacts your physicality and your recovery at night, that you can have all these other things in great order, but that HRV is such an important element. And I know we're just starting to unpack that a little bit on the ramifications, but a key ingredient.
Yeah, absolutely. And when people ask, I'm sure you've talked about it here. I think if a little summary statement is helpful, I think I would say that, the heart rate, the variability between heartbeats shows how effectively our bodies are able to respond to the micro changes in pressure air pressure within the body as we inhale and exhale. And that tells us how effectively we're able to deal with the stresses and challenges in our lives at that moment in time. Because if I'm overwhelmed dealing with this thing coming at me from over there and this from this way, if I'm overwhelmed with all that, my bandwidth to adapt to change in my environment is already taken up, and my heart rate is going to be very steady and stable. And so it's a very good just window into how effectively am I dealing with everything in my life right now? How effectively am I recovering from all those challenges? And do I have bandwidth to respond to changes in my environment? And that ultimately is I think the biggest sign of health and resilience.
Yeah. And I think about it in the kind of your own baseline. And if your glass is half full before you get started, then you're already at a deficit and you're not going to be able to take on all the things, right? And like you said, many of us are parents and have kids, shuffling them around and have our own personal goals and career goals. And we want to operate well. And ultimately, that's the key ingredient. And really the mission of the podcast here even is to dig into those things and find those little changes to improve that, so we can respond well to the things that are important to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the only other thing I would add is the study we did with Bootstrap that we just talked about there was looking at this, basically the side effects, as you said, of, although they're positive and intentional, the side effects of treatments when people are coming in for pain. There also is a technique that we have that we call the master reset, where someone will lie down on a table as little as 10 to 20 minutes and do some breath work. And of course, just lying down and doing an intentional breathing practice can be helpful. And on top of that, when we add the Neubie device, stimulate the vagus nerve, do this process called the master reset, we see that it takes those benefits and it amplifies them even further. It doubles or triples the effect, doubles or triples the shift into greater parasympathetic activity. And we see before and after measurements, we see people all the time will come in with an HRV measurement of 30 or 40 milliseconds is kind of the average of like the standard deviation that, if people who have Aura rings or biostraps or different things, you'll see that number in milliseconds. We'll see it go from 30 to 130 after a 20-minute treatment here. We'll see these really cool before and afters.
Wow.
And, it takes, of course, diligence to maintain it at that level for any period of time. But
Sure.
to see those types of before and after changes is a really cool change. And it really tells you that, you have a lot of opportunity to tap into that side more often and to spend more time there.
Yeah. I mean, 30 to 130 rough math. I mean, that's what 4x. I would be pretty good with a 400% improvement. So
Yeah, heck yeah.
If you can do that, and then it turns into that compounding interest thing again too, is like, you start picking up that momentum on that side of it. That's amazing.
That's right.
I'm ready to buy one myself. Not that I'm
we got a few people in that Northern Virginia, outside of DC area, so we can connect you with somebody up there.
Yeah, I did notice that. To that point, you do have a map of folks that utilize the Neubie.
That's right. Yes. So you can go to new.fit, which is NEU, like neurological, new.fit/locations, and it'll pop up on there. And you can look anywhere. So most of our locations are in the US. There's a few popping up in Canada, Australia, Europe, just in the last year when we went through the process of getting our device approved in those areas. But
Okay.
There's definitely locations, and there's more and more popping up as well all the time. And then we're in Austin. So, sometimes people, if there's no one near them, sometimes, patients will fly in and see us for a few days, sometimes rent a machine to use at home.
Okay.
But that's great. And we've supported a lot of people in that way. But if there's someone nearby, I mean, going and seeing somebody, having someone take you through the experience is definitely the best way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So practically, who are the practitioners that would traditionally utilize the device?
So most commonly are physical therapists, chiropractors, athletic trainers. Those are the big three. And then there's also some, functional medicine practitioners, doctors, pain medicine doctors, some orthopedic and neurology for sure.
Okay.
And then also the sports performance realm. There's some coaches who are using it. It has to be under a medical supervision. So if they're with a pro team or university, there's a whole staff there, and they're allowed to collaborate there. But so if people are using it for fitness or performance, they definitely can. And there's a ton of applications there. It just has to be done under the oversight of somebody who has a medical license.
Okay. Well, we're kind of coming up on time. I feel like I got about half a dozen more questions, but I'm really fascinated by this, and it's so encouraging. And it's just a fun story that your background on how it came to be. And so thank you for your passion and ingenuity to create this.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for doing everything you've done to start this podcast. And it's great to be on here with you, Scott.
So I do have closing out 3 questions that I didn't really pre-brief you for. So it's a bit of a hot seat, nothing too pressing, but
let's do it.
What are you reading right now?
Right now, I'm reading a book called The Resonance Effect on Frequency-Specific Microcurrent by Dr. Carol McMakin.
Okay. All right. So what are you listening to right now, be it music or podcast?
Podcasts. I alternate between, business podcasts and health podcasts. I think most recently, my good friend Ben Greenfield, a couple episodes of his.
Okay. I've been stuck on the Huberman podcast lately.
Oh, he's wonderful.
Yeah.
He's got great stuff.
Yeah. I make a joke. I come back from a sales background that I always need pictures. So he does a great job doing a lot of drawings and things of that nature to kind of make sense and simplify some of the complex terms and situations.
Yes. Yeah. He's great. He's a brilliant guy.
All right. Last one. What is your go-to rest and recovery method?
Well, not surprisingly, I'm going to say the Neubie. I do that master reset, do it before bed. And I've seen the first time I did it, I was comparing Oura Ring HRV scores with somebody, and I saw that they, were getting up in like the 140s, and I was down in the 50s and 60s. And I was like, oh my gosh, how'd you do that? And so I started doing the master reset before bed every night. First week, didn't see much. Finally, that 9th night, I got over 100 milliseconds for the first time, the next 2 or 3 nights, I got up 120, 130, 150.
Wow.
And it was so cool to see. It took a little bit of time. It was that cumulative effect. And that's one of those examples of like not necessarily seeing the progress each step, but continuing on in the right direction.
Yeah.
So that I also like two of my two other big ones would probably be cold exposure and red and infrared light. I'm a big fan of those, especially red light morning and evening to, around the circadian rhythm.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I still struggle with the cold exposure one, but I'll do a sauna and red light any day.
Nice.
So, all right. Well, Garrett, thank you so much again for your time and expertise, and the rest of you well.
Thank you, Scott. It's been a pleasure.